This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Professor at FSU, Tim Baghurst. He discusses his dual role at FSU, including director of FSU Coach, the state of coach education in the US, and some of the qualification consistency challenges, as well as some of his key beliefs into coach education and effective coaching. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Perfect. So, Tim, looking like I'm a bit red-faced, having just been for a run, which I've noticed as I jumped on this call. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on from a sweltering Florida, as we just said. How are things your end? Are you all okay?
All good here. Yep. Summer school is in session. Lots of sports camps going on around the community. People taking their vacations and kind of ramping up for what will be a busy fall season in a little over a month.
Perfect. And I think I would say if I was out with you guys, I'd definitely need the Factor 50 on with how it is at the moment. So I hope that everyone's sun creamed up or finding some shade somewhere. So, as I mentioned there, you're from, well, not from Florida, you live in Florida currently. But for people that maybe don't know you, don't know your work, can you just give us a bit of an oversight, I guess, of who you are and what you do from a day-to-day basis?
Sure. Well, I am the director of a center called FSU Coach. It's the Interdisciplinary Center for Athletic Coaching. We started that 5 years ago. Um, I guess you could say five, given COVID really interrupted any kind of development for a couple of years. And over the last 3 years in particular, we've been a little bit more mobile and active. We have an online master's degree in coaching, which is 100% online. People from all over the world enroll in that. We have a graduate certificate, which is 4 classes. And then we do a variety of things such as outreach, such as professional development activities, such as going in and working with teams, really wherever we can help, doing podcasts as an example. But before that, I guess I'll go in reverse. I was at Oklahoma State in Oklahoma State University. I was there for 7 years. I started some coaching education programs there. I was also originally hired there as a PE professor. My background is in teaching, so I went there as a PE professor. Before that, I was in Arkansas at a smaller school for 3 years, also at the University of Arkansas, much bigger school where I did my doctorate. And then if I keep going backwards, before that, Texas, master's in kinesiology in Texas. And then before that, we go to Wales, where I did my PGC, as well as a master's in sport and exercise psych. Go back before that, England. I was at the University of Chichester, did my undergrad there, did my A-levels in London, and I think that's probably where we start.
Nice. So obviously, I wasn't aware of the English thing. So when we were talking about teams off air, you would have known exactly who I was on about, which is all cool. Which is yeah, really nice. So I guess if we start from where you are right now, what is the purpose of the company? So what are you guys looking to achieve from the work that you're doing?
Yeah, the reality is that most coaches, I would say worldwide, but especially in the United States, have a significant lack of coaching education and development to bolster their ability to do their job well. There's there's a lot of research out there, but nothing compared to other disciplines that exist in human behavior and human performance. If we look at the world of business, it's overwhelmed with research studies and researchers looking to get that edge, to get that performance edge, to be more successful. And then when we go into sports, I mean, really, we're only a few decades old in sports performance. So there's so much to learn. Within that, though, we look at coaching education, and one could argue we're still in our infancy in terms of how we operate as coaches, how effective we are, how we can do better, how we can better serve our clients, i.e., our athletes and others. So our job really is to help evolve that and support coaches and sports administrators with best practices that allow them to do their job well. Um, we we just we just don't have many coaches who are properly trained to do their job.
Perfect. I think that's a really nice point for us to start here. So, if we look at it as a coach education journey, so from when maybe we did start realizing the importance of, I guess, a level of qualification and actual support for coaches, because I don't think it's just a qualification thing, in my opinion. I think similar to teachings is experiences and actually been in and around it and stuff. When we look at the start of coach education to where we are now, could you just, I guess, describe what the research has said during that time, but then also what in practice it's looked like during that period as well?
That's a very broad question across multiple countries, and I think it's important to clarify that each country has its own different history of coach education. And if we look at England and the UK, we would see that the system is much more defined, much more clear. The expectations are well understood by anybody wanting to go into coaching. There are levels. I was speaking with somebody the other day about how we have a coach, JJ Redick, who's coming into the NBA to coach the Lakers, and the only experience he has coaching, to my knowledge, is as a volunteer kind of peewee basketball coach last year. So he's coming into an NBA professional coaching realm, working with professional athletes, and has zero qualifications beyond having played, beyond having been a TV pundit, and has almost zero experience. That's something that probably wouldn't be allowed in the UK. And in some sports in the US, that isn't allowed. We have some sports that are very strict in terms of what is the expectations for you to be allowed to coach, etc. And there are licenses. Soccer, football does a good job of that in the US. At the same instance, if I want to go coach my son's little, under 10 team in the city, I can do it without any qualifications, without any training. And so the UK and others, particularly in Europe, have developed systems that over the years that have allowed coaches to be well trained. The US is a little bit more disjointed. We have some organizations that are very focused on this, and we have some organizations where it doesn't exist, or it's a token effort to certify. As an example, Florida high school coaches can be, it's called emergency certified by taking a few online short courses on concussion, on athletic training, on basic care and prevention of injuries, some fundamentals of coaching. They can go do the dishes, they can push play, they can come back, they can do their multiple guests, as I call it, and oh look, you're now a certified coach to go in and work with athletes. And I never understand how that's allowed, but it is. It is also interesting that there are professions within sports where certification is not just expected but required. Athletic training is a good example. Strength and conditioning is another good example. And I spoke to an athletic director overseeing a high school a couple of weeks ago, and I said, isn't it interesting that your athletic trainer over here is certified and trained, your strength and conditioning coach over here is certified and trained, but their boss, the head coach, doesn't have to be? And are we not all working with people? Can we not all cause people harm in the positions that we have as coaches? And the answer clearly is yes. Yet some are, well, because it's physical, because it involves treatment of injuries or the risk of injuries because we lift weights, we must have licensing. But when we work with a coach, the standards change. and that isn't as required. So as a consequence, there are many, many coaches in the US. I can't speak to other countries very well, but in the US who are serving as coaches with no training. And as a consequence, are they doing good, or are they causing harm? Are they being effective or ineffective?
So obviously that's a cultural thing. Like you're 100% right. In the UK, we have quite stringent qualification rules that you have to have, and at times we could argue the other way where they're overly strict. You can't get certain roles without a license, but they don't run enough of the licenses to get everyone on the course to then be able to get the roles. So it becomes a bit of a cat and mouse game where you can't jump up to the next step without having the qualification, but you can't get the qualification because you're not in that role. So it becomes strange. What do you think the reluctance is, if we're talking from a purely US perspective at this moment in time? What do you think the reluctance is, maybe for there to be a level of structure in certain sports for this qualification type and for this education type of work?
I think there's a fear there won't be enough coaches. There certainly aren't enough officials in the US. Many school districts, I'm speaking at the school level here, many school districts struggle to retain enough officials to actually host their sporting events. The same applies with coaches, where some athletic directors are scrambling just to find quote, warm bodies, just to fill the role of a coach. Because why would a coach do this? Coaching is a very difficult, very stressful job, particularly where you're being evaluated by others who have the freedom to say or do whatever they want. So why would a coach put themselves in that environment and get little to no pay, which again is another problem worth discussing, but to little to no pay, and then you come along and say, well, if you want to do this, you have to go and get training. And not only do you have to go and get training, you're going to have to pay for it yourself. And if you do go get that training, we're not going to pay you more anyway. And so there's just this, I think there's this reticence about requiring coaches to go and get training, simply because if we require this of them, they will walk. And if they walk, what do we do? Now, flip it just a second. Let's say in theory we did. Let's say in an ideal world, Michael, we said, you need to go and get this training. We're going to pay for it for you. And if you do go get this training, we're going to give you a raise. Would you go and do it? Probably.
Yeah, I
I
would have
would
thought so. Yeah.
so. I would hope so. And if you do go and get this training, one would also hope that the training is beneficial and allows you to perform your duties better, which means maybe you can tolerate the parents a little better. Maybe you can manage your team a little bit more effectively. Maybe you know how to do X, Y, and Z in these situations. So therefore, you're less likely to walk away. Because the true problem we have there's more than one true problem, but a big problem we have with coaches is burnout. Coaches say, I'm done. I don't need to deal with this anymore. I'm underpaid. I'm undervalued. I'm underappreciated. I do this for the kids. I do this because I want to give back. It's not about the money. It's not about the status. I don't need to do this anymore. And I walk away. Therefore, we have to find ways to keep them. And we can do that financially. We can do that by having a support system in place for them. We can do that by having training for them. And if we can provide those things, they're less likely to walk away, which means we have less turnover, which means we don't have to be so worried about how am I going to fill that position if I ask that coach to go get professional development. So this is a circular argument where there is no, oh, well, the obvious solution is this. There is no obvious solution beyond incentivizing them to stay in the sport, even when it's hard. But then as part of that incentive, requiring them to actually be licensed and trained.
So if you now take this to, let's say, the college level, so I'm going to use football as example, not UK football, we'll go American football, etc. What what qualifications would the coaches within that setup have? So I know you've got obviously got your um, D D3, D2, D1 schools, etc. And I know you got UCO, JUCO, and stuff underneath that. But if it, say, for example, you've got a D3 school or a D1 school, what type of qualifications would the coaches within those environments have in an American football setup?
None.
That's madness. Like without being disrespectful, that seems crazy to me because you're then emphasizing everything on whether you win or lose. That's the only you
Just
if
the
you yeah.
contradict you. I mean, the reality is it does differ by collegiate level.
Yeah.
Division 3 may have a greater emphasis on student graduation because they're not scholarship athletes. So there may be a greater emphasis on graduation. But you tell me an athletic director that's going to be happy with you having a 1-11 record every year, but you're graduating students. No, we live in a world where sports require competition and winning, and continual losing like that, you're not staying very long. You asked me what qualifications they had to have, and the answer is none. So how do they get their jobs? Through work experience. That's the system where collegiate coaches get their jobs. They're probably a graduate assistant somewhere. They were a volunteer coach. They took a job as an assistant coach and worked their way up. It's the same in the NFL. It's the same in a lot of sports. It is a combination of who you know and what you know, and who knows you. But when I say what you know, I'm not talking about what qualifications you have. I'm talking about the knowledge you have where somebody says, we need somebody like this. Oh, I know a guy, Michael. He's been blah, blah, blah. He worked with so-and-so. You should check him out.
But does
They don't
that not
they don't say, did Michael go and get certified with USA football and get his A license before he goes and becomes a collegiate coach? No.
does that not just lead itself to you're going to make an assumption if someone's come through, let's say a Alabama, for example. So they've started up as a grad student at Alabama, which is a successful program, and have worked their way up, and then they become, I don't know, a offensive line coach or something like that. They're naturally going to get opportunities elsewhere because they're going to have better players, which makes them look like they are doing a better job. Whereas there might be someone else in a program that's D3 that actually is an incredibly skillful practitioner, but just doesn't have as good at athletes and is getting to the ceiling of what he's able to produce with those players. That's a far better coach, just hasn't almost been in an environment that sells them as well.
Yes, but that's not how the world works for the most part. Here's an example. And I say this delicately because I don't know the ins and outs of history. Okay.
Mm.
But before I came to Florida State, there was a coach here named Bobby Bowden who was here for 30 plus years and is an absolute legend. Um, think Sir Alex Ferguson. That was Bobby Bowden. He created a dynasty here at Florida State. But he got to the end of his legacy. He was in his could be 80s, but certainly late 70s. And one of his assistant coaches replaced him as head coach. Jimbo Fisher is his name. So you can Google him. He won the national championship here at Florida State for American football. And then it started to go downhill. So for reasons, again, I don't know the ins and outs, but he took a job at Texas A&M University in Texas and took a contract. Let me tell you what it is.
I'm Googling away as you're talking here. I've got Bobby Bowden in front of me.
He
Yeah, yeah.
started with a 10-year, $75 million contract, and then they extended it for 95 million guaranteed. So this guy made 95 million and went for 3 or 4 seasons with a very, very average record. Very average record. So how did this guy go from winning a national championship to going to another program that is or should be very successful? They have way more money than Florida State, way more money. But then have a mediocre career there. He ended up getting fired and walked away and made, I don't know, they had to write a check for 60-70 million dollars. It was crazy just to fire him. Well, you could argue what you just posited, which is just because you're in the right program and have the right connections and have the right athletes around you that generate success does not mean you're a great coach. The challenge is, how do you, if you are a coach who isn't surrounded by talent, how do you get the best out of the athletes you have to be almost noticed? And this is where it goes back to, it is not just what you know, it is who you know, and it is who knows you. Because if you're down in Division III, like you said, and you're getting the best out of your athletes, and you have connections with other people, they'll know. Right? They'll know.
Yeah.
Because you've had those conversations with them. They've come and watched you. They've seen how you've improved your program, et cetera, et cetera. They know. And that may be the stepping point. I mean, take Oklahoma State. It is a big university. It is not a powerhouse. It is well recognized. It's considered a major university for sports. But there I am, working away, doing what I hope would be considered very good work, building a program, publishing, writing books, etc. And I met the dean of this college at a conference. Conversation led to discussion about what's going on at FSU, led to discussion about coaching, led to his interest in coaching here at FSU, led down the road to me being interviewed and getting the job. Now, did I get the job because I knew the dean? No. I got the job because I was qualified and I had the work legacy to show that I could come here and be successful. Did it help? Yeah, I may never have even seen the job had I not met the dean. So when we talk about opportunities in coaching, so much of it is connections as opposed to qualifications. So I do this, Michael. I present on culture, okay? Building culture in your teams and programs. And I show a picture of my diplomas because I've got a number of them, right? I've got 5 degrees plus some other stuff. I also have up on my right here, I've got a thing of medals. Things I've won, competitions I've been part of, et cetera, et cetera. And if somebody comes into my office, do they look at my diplomas or do they look at my medals?
Probably the medals. Probably the medals.
And this is especially true in sports. Especially true in sports. They look at my medals. Oh, you went to World Championships? Yeah. Oh, you went to Senior World Championships. Oh, that's a gold medal. Oh, cool. You went to the Pan Am Championships. Yeah. Uh-huh. And you know what they're thinking? I should probably listen to what he has to say because he's been a successful athlete. They don't look at my diplomas and go, wow, you got this degree and that degree and that degree. And no. And I had I had a coach tell me, he said, I didn't gain the respect of my athletes until they learned I'd been a college player at the University of Florida. Because the athletes didn't care about his coaching diplomas. They didn't care about his training. They didn't care about that. It was, wow, you played for the University of Florida? You must have been good. We should probably listen to you. So amongst parents, amongst athletes, there is a unspoken resume, and it is not the certifications and the licenses that you have. It is the experiences you have and the connections you have that often get you those jobs rather than the resume builders that you have academically.
So, listen, what I will say for like people that are listening to here, I'm not a qualifications mean everything because I haven't been on my A license. I learned some really interesting bits whilst I was on there, but the majority of it you can probably learn externally. What I think it does allow you to do when you've got some level of certification, whatever that looks like, is an understanding of maybe where your blind spots are. And that's probably what I found it was better for. So for me, it did a little bit about my personality type. So that was one of the things that it looked at my personality type and how I acted under stress or those types of things. Also used a little bit on physical data, and I hadn't done loads of work on there. So just from a self-reflection point of view, I think that was really useful because it said, okay, here's what maybe you're good at and you know, here's what you maybe don't know so much and you need to work on. The reason I'm so baffled by this is because if you know go never go through any sort of formal qualification, education, anything like that, and you're only ever in the environment, it is very easy to settle into the culture and environment of that place and be oblivious to your blind spots. And then when you then try and make a jump to a bigger school or to the pros or anything like that, actually those blind spots get absolutely amplified and you'll find yourself out the door quicker than the thing. And I don't know the situation with someone like Urban Meyer, but my assumption would be from the conversation you're having there, he potentially had some blind spots in the way that he acted with his players that he had never been called out on that might have happened in like a pro license situation in the UK with football. That when he went to the pros went, "We're not having this. You've been successful at college, but you're not going to talk to an NFL player who's had 10 years in the league who's then going to call you out on some of it where they've had success at Baltimore or Pittsburgh or wherever else." So I just think from that self awareness perspective of what am I good at, what am I not good at, what do I need my staff to be good at, it seems a baffling road to go down where maybe you don't have that.
I'm telling you what is, not what should be. Do you understand? I'm telling you the reality is that the majority of people make assumptions. We make determinations based on what we see, hear, and feel, not what we've been trained to do. And I am a absolute proponent of professional development. You should do it continually, period. I'm enrolled in a graduate certificate here at Florida State. I don't need to be. I've got the job I want. I've got the resume that has gotten me everything that I thought I could achieve in my career. I don't have to do that, but I can be better. So I have to go find people who can make me better. And in this case, I'm doing training with a different department. Professional development is crucial, even if there are situations where you go, yeah, I already know that. Yeah, I've already learned that. Yeah, I've heard that before. Because it standardizes the learning for everybody so that there, as you mentioned, the gaps aren't necessarily there. And it ensures that everybody going into that environment has the same knowledge and training to ensure that quality is a result or should be a result, because people go through training and then they're terrible. Let's face it. We have some terrible coaches who were well trained, but it ensures that those things, whether it be mental care of athletes, whether it be team cohesion, whether it be nutrition, whether it be strength conditioning, whatever, you've got the fundamentals that are required so that everybody going into this system has the same things. We have a master's degree, 100% online. There are things in that degree that you will never learn unless you take this degree. And so you don't know what you don't know. And so to have the maybe arrogance of some coaches to say, well, look at my record. Look at how many wins I had last season. Look at the players I've produced. My response sometimes is, think how many more wins you could have had. Think about the players that could have come from your program that you destroyed in the process of creating these, etc. We don't know what we don't know. Therefore, we have to keep trying to learn it. And professional development is a systematic way of doing that, as opposed to what many of us do: listen to podcasts, read books, speak to other coaches, go to networking things. We do these things and we grow organically that way. But then we also have to grow in a systematic way where we rely on best practices, on the research that's out there, as opposed to, well, my mate tried this last week and I think it worked pretty good, so I think we're going to do it in training today, which happens a lot.
Yeah, and listen, I was completely unaware of this, but it makes sense of when you mediarize American sports, of what I see quite a lot. You tend to see, and historically, I'd say in particular, quite iron fist type coaching, particularly in your NFL type stuff, which is you've got to be really firm and strong with these players. It's only maybe new now where you've got people like Mike McDaniel that are kind of the other end of the spectrum that seem to break the mold. I'm a Dolphins fan, so hence why I kind of go down that road. But I can now see why, being honest, my perception of America is that they like to win, they like winners. If you then have that perception of,
Three.
say that again,
Is that different to any other country?
I would say you're more open with it.
Fair enough.
So I wouldn't say that people don't like to win, but I would say that America, like they'll go, no, we're really unapologetic that we want to win. Um, Whereas in England and UK, in my opinion, we hide it, but then when it gets into the heat of the moment and emotions start racing, you start to see true characters behind that. I then see maybe in coach environments, you can look at Last Chance U, which I know is a completely dramatized version, but you see probably some of these coaching practices that don't worry about well-being of players or have an understanding of the person behind the player. Well, if you see people having success like your Bill Belichick's that runs with an iron fist, or Greg Popovich as a Spurs fan, and then you've experienced that as a player when you were younger, and you're never being educated in between to say maybe there's a different way that you can connect with your players that might get better outcomes. It seems to make sense that that becomes a cycle of that type of behavior within sports.
Yes. Again, it goes back to, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know any other way, so that's how you do it. We can also say that the coaching styles, an iron fist isn't necessarily wrong, and an iron fist may not necessarily show that the coach actually cares for the players. Remember, we only see what we get to see, right? So we don't know what goes on necessarily in the locker room. We don't know what goes on in the personal lives of the players, etc. The coaches, if we look at professional sports, college sports over here, which would be considered professional in the UK, if we look at that level, the vast majority of those coaches have very little formal training. Yes, they may go to an annual conference or something put together by the NCAA or their association. But in terms of I'm going to go away and study coaching to be better as a coach, very rare. We were super excited when our beach volleyball coach here at FSU, she was one of the first people to sign up for our master's degree. She's been to the national championship twice. I think she's been in the role 7 years. She started the program. She's been in the role 7 years, and they've won their conference championship 7 times in a row. So think about that. They won their conference every year. They're ranked top 10 every year. And she came and said, I've never really been trained to be a coach. I was a pro volleyball player, and I want to learn more. And she's finished now. She completed our master's degree. So I look at that as the model of somebody who had the humility to say, even though don't you know who I am, even though haven't you seen my record, even though have you seen my salary? I don't know her salary, but you get the idea. I don't need any of this because I'm successful every year. She had the humility to go, I'm successful, but maybe I could be more successful. So what do I need to do? And so she went out, she spent the last 2 years going through our master's degree. That is the coach that I want to hire because they recognize the need for growth, that they can improve. Unfortunately, most coaches don't have that. It is interesting. I've worked at 3 major universities. Major. I mean, we're talking millions and millions of dollars poured into sports. And very, very few of the coaches in those universities have ever reached out to me to say, can you help our program? And I've reached out. Sure. Of course, I'm willing to help, right? We're in the caring business. We want to help people improve. And most often I hear crickets. Very few have reached out. One was 2-time gold medalist at the Olympics, one of the legends in sports in the US. Hall of Fame in everything you can imagine. And he reached out and said, I think you can help some of my players. Can you meet with them on a regular basis over the season? Why? I think primarily because he was getting a little older and maybe didn't have the connections that he maybe used to have as a younger man. So that season I worked with 2 or 3 of his difficult players, difficult athletes. But it took, people told me he'll never work with you. That sport is so insulated, you can't get in. And he had the humility to say, I need some help here. And it was pretty neat. He ended up teaching a class for me. It was fantastic. But again, it requires that ability to say, all right, I'll accept that I can be better. Come help me be better.
So, and that's, I think, as you said, the humility to do that is amazing. Let's say everything I believe in sport becomes a fad. So you look at something like Moneyball, one team does it, people realize it works, everyone does it. Particular type of defense works for one person one season, all of a sudden everyone's doing that defense. So now everyone does a 3-4 defense, everyone copies one another. If I were to say to you that there's a real buy-in to coach education in the next season for whatever reason, what part of coach education, or what do you think is what does the research suggest that over the next 5 years is going to be the thing that could get coaches really excited to have someone with your level of expertise or someone like you in their building helping their coaches get better?
People over performance. People over performance. We spend inordinate amounts of time and money on the physical, tactical, technical training of people. Insane amount. I mean, think about all the facilities we have to make sure that that person is in their peak physical condition. We spend inordinate amount of time, that's not a word, inordinate amount of time analyzing previous matches, breaking down somebody's game film, finding that weakness, et cetera, et cetera. We develop all this time in developing a strategy. And then that athlete that you've spent maybe years developing had a bad day yesterday. They got in a fight with their significant other. Their kid got sick. They saw something that upset them. All of that training matters when that person walks out onto the field, the pitch, the pool, whatever, wherever they're going. It doesn't matter. If coaches can learn to work better with people, to understand the needs and well-being of people, to motivate them well, to care for them better, athletes will perform better. Michael, if you're my coach and you're a very transactional coach and you just expect me to perform like a robot week in, week out, I'm going to do it because I'm competitive and I want to win. But when I have a problem, I'm probably not going to come tell you. I'm going to maybe even hide it. And it's going to affect my performance because I'm not thinking about the game. I'm thinking about something else that's going on. And as a consequence, my performances are going to dip and you're going to look at trying to understand why. And the truth is that I got something going on that I really need to tell you about, but I don't trust you or you don't seem to care about me. So I'm not going to come tell you. We as coaches have to understand that the people we work with are people just like us. And when we spend so much time on all of these training systems and equipment and science, sometimes we also need to spend time with the counselors, the sports psychologists, the et cetera, et cetera. And it's why our master's degree, about 70% of the classes we offer, about 7 out of 10 of them, they're not the hard sciences. They're the philosophy and ethics. They're the motor development. They're the sociology and understanding people's backgrounds. We've got international student working with internationals. We've got counseling. We've got sports psych. There's one that I can't think of off the top of my head, but there's 6 that really don't have anything to do with hard sports performance.
This is, I guess, answering my next question, but do you think this is do you think these are skills that coaches can learn? Or do you think that these are the skills that some personality types gravitate more towards? And then it's about finding, I guess, athletes in your environment that you can work with. So if you've got someone that prefers the more direct command style, you need to get players that are going to respond to that. If you prefer someone who is more in that well-being development environment, you need players that are going to align to that? Or do you think these are skills that actually similar to learning how to increase someone's VO2 max? These are skills that can actually be developed by practitioners.
The answer is yes. And the evidence for that is just my own coaching and teaching over 20 years. I don't think you would have liked me as a professor 20 years ago. I hope you would like me now because I have changed the way that I teach and coach and interact with people because I've learned. Does it mean that I'm brilliant? No. I'm still learning. I'm still developing. But can an autocratic coach transition into somebody else? Yes. Does that require work for them? Of course. It's going to be hard. But if you're well, this is how we've always done it, or this is who I am, then you've set some non-negotiables with your athletes that mean they may not perform to their best. They may not have the best relationship with you because you are set in stone.
And if there's anyone listening right now that thinks, you know what, this really speaks to me, I actually want to go down this route and I want to try and investigate how I can become more of a person over performance-based practitioner. Where can they start? Where would you suggest that they started trying to investigate what type of material to read? Is there particular books, particular papers on Google Scholar, particular podcasts, other than this one, obviously?
You mean other than listening to our podcast and
Yeah, yeah.
coming in and being part of our program? You mean
Yeah.
other than those
Other
things?
than those two things, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't want to make specific recommendations. The the one book I found very influential, I said I won't make recommendations. I'll mention one book that's very different. It's not like a book I've read before, and it's called My Losing Season by Pat Conroy. Pat Conroy was a college athlete many years ago. He's since passed, but he was a writer. His whole career was a writer, and he wrote a book about his experiences in basketball in high school and college. And the majority of the book is about his experiences with his basketball coach. And his basketball coach was horrific, horrific. And he wrote about just the horribleness of his seasons there. That was very insightful for me because we saw a coach who was everything that a coach should not be. We often read books that are about success. How I won my championship, 12 steps to success, the legacy of so and so. We don't often read books where people are struggling, where failure has happened. And I, as a friend of mine recently, he's a coach. He was recently released from his job, and I want him to write a book and call it Fired. Right? Talk about the trauma that goes through that, going up to and into that event of being let go because of perceived failure. That is something that a lot of coaches go through. I can't tell you the percentage of coaches that get fired every season, but you and I know it's pretty high, especially in professional and collegiate sports. I mean, the NBA is going through hiring processes right now. There's Black Monday in the NFL, right? The next day, fired. Soccer is the same way. We'll see which international coaches get fired after Euro 2024 and Copa America for poor performances. We don't really talk about that stuff. We don't talk about the struggles and the stress and the challenges that coaches experience in the bad times. We tend to just focus on the good times. So if anybody's interested, just send me an email. Find me on social media. I'm not too hard to find. I'll be happy to recommend some things to read. But again, I do believe that as coaches, we have a responsibility to continually get better. One thing I want to mention, Michael, before I forget, because I know we're near time. When we do go to clinics and professional development, because a lot of us do, and we at FSU Coach, we run clinics too. We just had one a couple weeks ago in Orlando. It is really important, and this is something I've learned over the last year that has really changed the way that I try to recruit people to our clinics. It is really important that it's not just you going, because research has found that if you go to my clinic and you're part of whatever, Northampton FC, and you come to my clinic and you get all this great material and you're inspired and you have great new ideas and you go back and you tell your colleagues, hey, I was at this clinic, I learned this, and we have this great idea here. We should try to implement this. What's going to happen?
They're going to not be receptive, more likely than not.
Yeah, whatever. I wasn't there, right? It's like telling a joke that just falls flat on ears because you weren't part of that joke or you weren't there to hear it. And so retelling it just doesn't have the same emphasis. So when you're going to professional development, such as clinics or conferences or trainings or whatever, try to go as a group, because as a group, you start to see it all together. And so when you go back, you have that emphasis that, yeah, we all saw that, we all felt that, we all learned that. Let's try to implement it. But I'll also give you a second argument. This happened last week, completely out the blue. I got asked to go and speak at a county to the superintendent and principals and assistant principals and all the leadership in this county for schools. And I was invited by the athletic director that oversees the county. And he said, hey, I want to tell you a story. He said, you remember when you came down a few months ago and you spoke at our professional development day for the teachers? Yeah, of course. Yeah, you spoke on culture. Right. Well, one of the coaches in that session came up to me a couple weeks ago and told me that he'd attended your session. He said some of the stuff he knew, but some of it he didn't. And he went back and implemented it in his program. And he said they won the state championship. Now, do I take full credit for that? Absolutely not. But it goes back to what you said at the beginning, which is you may hear things you already know, but there may be blind spots or areas that you can improve on that you just never thought about. And so it's a really neat story for me that I'll probably take with me for a long time of somebody who came to my session, learned a few things, went away, implemented those few things, and saw success.
Yeah, and I really like the idea of people coming together in groups, because also I think that allows you to work through the program as well. So you might hear something on the day and then go, could we implement that? And they might say, no, we'd struggle because of X, Y, Z, but we can all agree that this would work really well. And it allows you to almost bounce the idea across. So I think that makes complete sense. So yeah, I am conscious of time, like we said. So I guess last question, which is something I ask for everyone, which is, if I were to ask the people you work with to describe you in 3 words, how would you hope to be described?
I'll give you one word.
Okay.
I'll give you one. Three is too much. Driven. I'm very competitive. I like winning. I like being successful. But in order to do that, we have to keep pushing. We have to keep getting better and trying new things. Driven is important. There are sometimes costs to being driven, but if we don't have drive, we have apathy. And unfortunately, in coaching, there's a lot of that.
No, I think a really nice sentiment to finish on. But yeah, listen, Tim, really, really enjoyed that conversation. A real eye opener for me. And as I said, I imagine for a lot of people listening, real time to reflect on maybe some blind spots or some stuff. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I know we haven't gone through probably a tenth of the knowledge you have, so it might be something that we pick up again in the future. But yeah, so thank you so much for spending your morning with us.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.